The deafening crack of a porcelain vase shattering against the wall echoed through the mansion, making Madeline Reynolds flinch as she hastily packed her few belongings into a small leather satchel. Her husband Marcus would return from the saloon soon, and she knew from the 5 painful years of their marriage that his rage would only intensify with each whiskey consumed. Tonight, beneath the cover of darkness in the spring of 1875, she would finally escape the gilded prison that was her home in Boston. "You won't survive out there," Marcus had sneered just days before when she dared to mention visiting her ailing aunt alone. "A woman like you needs protection. You need me." But what Madeline needed was freedom from the bruises that bloomed like violet shadows across her skin, from the isolation that had slowly suffocated her spirit, from the man who had transformed from charming suitor to cruel jailer in the span of a wedding night. Her trembling fingers fumbled with the clasp of the small lockbox hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her dressing table. Inside lay her grandmother's wedding band, a modest sum of money she had secretly saved from household allowances, and a newspaper clipping advertising opportunity in a place far from Boston's stifling society, the Wyoming Territory. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight. With one final glance at the lavish bedroom that had become her cage, Madeline slipped down the servants' staircase and out into the cool night air, her heart pounding with both terror and exhilaration. She knew Marcus would search for her. A man like him couldn't bear the humiliation of abandonment. But she also knew she would rather die than spend another day as Mrs. Marcus Harrington, society wife and private prisoner. The journey west was arduous. Madeline had never traveled alone, but desperation made her bold. She purchased a ticket for the Transcontinental Railroad, giving the clerk a false name and wearing a simple dress that wouldn't attract attention. For the first time in years, she was just another face in the crowd rather than Mrs. Harrington, whose husband kept such a careful watch. Each mile that passed beneath the rumbling train carried her further from danger, but also deeper into uncertainty. The Wyoming Territory was still wild, barely tamed by civilization. She had responded to an advertisement seeking teachers for a small settlement called Promise Creek, having taught briefly before her marriage. The salary was meager, but it came with accommodations, a small room above the schoolhouse, and most importantly, it was nearly 2,000 miles from Boston. As the landscape outside her window transformed from lush eastern forests to rolling prairies and finally to the rugged terrain of the Western Territories, Madeline felt her chest expand with something unfamiliar. It took her several days to recognize it as hope. The final leg of her journey required a stagecoach ride from Cheyenne. Exhausted but determined, Madeline boarded the coach alongside a traveling salesman, an elderly couple heading to visit their son, and a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Abigail Thornton, the mayor's wife from Promise Creek. "You must be Miss Smith, the new schoolteacher," Mrs. Thornton said, eyeing Madeline with scrutiny. "We were expecting someone older." "I'm 23, Madeline replied, the false surname feeling strange on her tongue. "And I assure you, I'm quite experienced with children." This wasn't entirely untrue, though her teaching experience was limited to 1 year before Marcus had courted and wed her. She had always found joy in educating young minds. "Well," Mrs. Thornton sniffed, "Promise Creek isn't Boston. Life here is hard, especially for a woman alone." "I'm counting on it being different from Boston," Madeline murmured, turning to gaze out the window at the vast, open landscape that seemed to promise something she hadn't dared hope for in years' possibility. The stagecoach rumbled and jostled along the rutted trail for hours. By the time they crested a hill overlooking a valley where Promise Creek nestled between rolling grasslands and distant mountains, The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. Madeline's first impression of Promise Creek was one of modest determination. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, the schoolhouse, and a smattering of other businesses. Houses and small farms dotted the surrounding area, smoke curling from chimneys as families prepared evening meals. The coach rolled to a stop outside the general store, where a small gathering of townsfolk had assembled to greet the new arrivals. Madeline stepped down, her legs wobbly from the long journey, and breathed deeply of air untainted by Boston's coal smoke and industrial grime. "Miss Smith." A tall man with a neatly trimmed gray beard stepped forward. "I'm Thomas Thornton, mayor of Promise Creek. Welcome to our community." "Thank you, sir," Madeline replied, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "I'm eager to begin teaching." "School term starts in 2 weeks," Mayor Thornton said with a nod. "That should give you time to settle in. My wife will show you to the schoolhouse and your accommodations." As Mrs. Thornton led her down the dusty main street, Madeline felt the weight of curious gazes following her. A new face was clearly an event in Promise Creek, especially a young, unmarried woman traveling alone. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. A narrow staircase at the back led to her living quarters, a small room with a bed, dresser, washstand, and pot-bellied stove. "It's not much, Mrs. Thornton said, her tone suggesting she expected Madeline to complain. Instead, Madeline set her satchel on the bed and moved to the window, which overlooked the main street and, beyond it, the vast expanse of prairie stretching toward distant mountains. A smile tugged at her lips. "It's perfect," she said softly. After Mrs. Thornton departed with a list of expectations and rules longer than Madeline's arm, she sank onto the bed, fatigue overwhelming her. For the first time in 5 years, she would sleep without fear, without listening for footsteps in the hall or bracing for the door to swing open. Tonight, she would sleep as Madeline Smith, schoolteacher, not Madeline Harrington, possession. The following morning, Madeline awoke to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town coming to life, horses nickering, wagon wheels creaking, the distant lowing of cattle. She dressed in her simplest skirt and shirtwaist, pinned her chestnut hair into a practical bun, and ventured out to explore her new home. The general store seemed the logical place to start. She needed supplies for her room and would need to introduce herself to the community. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, drawing the attention of the shopkeeper and the few customers browsing the merchandise. "Good morning," said a cheerful woman behind the counter. "You must be our new schoolteacher. I'm Sarah Wilson. My husband Jeremiah and I run the store." "Madeline Smith," she replied, relieved by the friendly welcome. "Yes, I arrived yesterday. All the way from Boston. That's quite a journey for a young woman alone," Sarah remarked, her expression curious but kind. "What brings you so far west?" Madeline had prepared for this question. "A desire for adventure, I suppose, and the opportunity to make a difference in a growing community." Sarah smiled. "Well, we're glad to have you. Our last teacher was nearly 60 and had a temper that sent half the children home in tears each day. Now, what can I help you with?" As Madeline gathered the essentials she needed, Sarah introduced her to the other customers, Mrs. Peterson, whose twins would be in Madeline's class, Mr. Jenkins, the blacksmith, and a young woman named Lucy who worked at the town's small hotel. "You'll want to stock up on lamp oil and candles," Sarah advised, "and perhaps some fabric to make curtains for your windows. The morning sun comes right through those east-facing windows at the schoolhouse." By the time Madeline had completed her purchases, she felt a tentative sense of belonging beginning to form. These people had accepted her without question, taking her at face value, something that had never happened in Boston's rigid social hierarchy. As she left the store, arms full of brown paper packages, she collided with a solid form just outside the door. Her parcels tumbled to the ground, and she would have followed if not for a strong hand catching her elbow. "Steady there, madam," came a deep voice with a slight drawl. Madeline looked up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. The man who had prevented her fall was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. "I'm so sorry," Madeline stammered, flustered by both the collision and the intensity of the stranger's gaze. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "No harm done," he replied, releasing her arm and crouching to gather her fallen packages. "Let me help you with these." As he collected her purchases, Madeline noticed calloused hands that spoke of hard work, but there was a gentleness to his movements that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "You're new to Promise Creek," he observed, rising to his full height and handing her the packages. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I arrived yesterday. I'm the new schoolteacher, Madeline Smith." "Owen Reed," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I have a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town." There was something in the way he looked at her, not with the proprietary assessment she was accustomed to from men in Boston, but with straightforward interest and respect that made her cheeks warm. "Well, Mr. Reed, thank you for your assistance, and for preventing what would have been a rather undignified introduction to the street dirt." A smile creased the corners of his eyes. "My pleasure, Miss Smith. I expect we'll be seeing more of each other, small town and all." With another tip of his hat, he stepped past her into the store, leaving Madeline with an odd, fluttering sensation in her chest that she quickly attributed to the morning's excitement. Over the next 2 weeks, Madeline threw herself into preparing for the school term. She cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized textbooks, created lesson plans, and began to meet the families whose children would soon fill the desks. She also began to understand the rhythms of Promise Creek. The saloon came alive in the evenings when ranch hands and miners from the surrounding area would come to town. Sunday mornings found most residents at the small church, where Reverend Miller delivered passionate sermons about hard work and God's grace. Wednesdays were busy at the general store when the supply wagon arrived from Cheyenne with new merchandise and mail. And occasionally, she would glimpse Owen Reed riding through town on his magnificent chestnut gelding or conducting business at the bank or general store. Each time, he would acknowledge her with a respectful nod or tip of his hat, sometimes stopping for a brief conversation that left her oddly breathless. From Mrs. Wilson at the general store, Madeline learned that Owen Reed was considered one of the territory's most successful ranchers, having built his operation from nearly nothing over the past decade. He was respected for his fair dealings and for providing steady employment to many in the area. He was also, Sarah had added with a meaningful look, one of the most eligible bachelors in 3 counties. "Not that he seems inclined to settle down," Sarah had said. "Many have tried to catch his eye, but that man seems married to his ranch." Madeline had merely nodded, assuring herself that her interest in Owen Reed was nothing more than the natural curiosity of a newcomer about a prominent community member. She had no intention of entering another marriage, not when she had just escaped one that had nearly destroyed her. The day before school was to begin, Madeline was arranging the desks in neat rows when the schoolhouse door opened. She looked up, expecting one of the mothers bringing in a reluctant child to meet the teacher in advance. Instead, Owen Reed filled the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. "Mr. Reed," she said, surprised. "Can I help you with something?" He stepped inside, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that stood in stark contrast to many of Boston's so-called gentlemen who believed their status exempted them from common courtesy. "Miss Smith, I hope I'm not interrupting your preparations." "Not at all. I was just finishing up." He glanced around the schoolhouse with approval. "You've made some changes. Looks good." "Thank you." She set down the chalk she'd been holding. "Did you need something? Actually, I've come with a proposition." At her raised eyebrow, he quickly continued, "A professional one. I have a boy working at my ranch, Miguel. He's 15 and smart as a whip, but he's never had proper schooling. His English is improving, but he'd benefit from regular lessons." "Of course he's welcome to attend," Madeline replied. "That's just it. He can't leave the ranch during the day, too much work. But he's eager to learn. I was wondering if you might consider coming out to the ranch a couple of evenings a week to tutor him. I'd compensate you fairly, of course." Madeline considered the request. The extra income would be welcome, as her teacher's salary was modest. But more than that, she was touched by this man's concern for a young worker in his employ. "I'd be happy to help, Miguel," she said, "though I'm not sure how I would get out to your ranch in the evenings." "I'd send a wagon for you, or come myself," Owen assured her, "and see you safely back afterward." Something in his steadfast gaze made her believe him completely. Unlike Marcus, whose promises had always concealed ulterior motives, Owen Reed's offer seemed genuinely motivated by concern for the boy. "Then I accept," she said. "Perhaps we could start next week after I've gotten the school term underway." "Perfect." He smiled, transforming his serious face. "Miguel will be pleased. He's got dreams bigger than Wyoming, that one." As Owen turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Smith, there's a social at the church this Saturday evening, a chance for folks to come together before harvest gets into full swing. If you're not otherwise engaged, it might be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the community." "Thank you for letting me know," she said, unsure if this was merely neighborly information or something more. "It's nothing formal," he added. "Just music, some dancing, plenty of food. Starts around 7. With a final nod, he departed, leaving Madeline with a curious sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with the upcoming school term. The first day of school arrived with bright sunshine, and 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Madeline stood at the door, greeting each child by name, having memorized the school roster provided by Mayor Thornton. By midday, she had assessed the varying educational levels within her classroom and begun to develop a strategy for teaching such a diverse group. The older students could help the younger ones, and she would divide her time between groups working on different lessons. When the school day ended, Madeline felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she'd experienced in years. Here, her efforts mattered. Here, she was valued for her mind and abilities, not merely as an ornament or possession. As the week progressed, she fell into a rhythm with her students and found genuine joy in teaching. The children of Promise Creek were curious and eager to learn, if sometimes rough around the edges. Many came from ranching or farming families, where education was respected but practical skills were prioritized. Saturday evening arrived, and Madeline found herself standing before the small mirror in her room, debating whether to attend the social. Part of her worried that her attempts to remain unattached might be compromised by appearing at such an event. But a stronger part longed for connection, for community things Marcus had systematically stripped from her life in Boston. She chose a dress of deep blue cotton, more modest than the fashionable gowns she'd left behind but still flattering. Pinning her hair in a simpler style than her usual severe bun, she allowed a few curls to frame her face. The church was already lively when she arrived, lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Children darted between adults, and the air hummed with conversation and laughter. "Miss Smith," Sarah Wilson waved her over. "I'm so glad you came. Let me introduce you to everyone you haven't met yet." For the next hour, Madeline was guided through a whirlwind of introductions. She met ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the town doctor and his family, and many others whose names and faces began to blur together. She was sampling Mrs. Peterson's apple pie when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Evening, Miss Smith. Glad you could make it." She turned to find Owen Reed, looking surprisingly different in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest. Without his customary hat, his blonde hair revealed hints of gold in the lamplight. "Mr. Reed, good evening." She felt suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "It's a lovely gathering." "Promise Creek knows how to make its own fun," he agreed. "Have you tried the dancing yet?" Before she could answer, the musicians struck up a lively reel, and several couples moved to the cleared space in the center of the room. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar with these dances," Madeline admitted. In Boston, she had learned the formal waltzes and quadrilles of society ballrooms, not the exuberant country dances of the West. "They're not hard to learn," Owen said, offering his hand. "If you're willing to try." Madeline hesitated. Dancing with Owen Reed would invite speculation, and the last thing she wanted was to become the subject of town gossip. But his eyes held no demand, only invitation, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was free to accept or decline, as she chose a simple freedom that had been denied her for years. "I'd like that," she said, placing her hand in his. The dance was indeed simple to learn, though fast-paced and energetic. Owen proved to be an excellent partner, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure on her waist or hand. By the end of the song, Madeline was flushed and laughing, having enjoyed herself more than she had in years. They danced 2 more songs before taking a break for refreshments. Owen brought her a cup of punch, and they found a relatively quiet corner to catch their breath. "You're a natural," he said, his admiration evident. "You picked up those steps faster than most." "I had a good teacher," she replied, surprised by her own flirtatious tone. His smile deepened. "I understand you've been a good teacher yourself. I've heard nothing but praise from the parents of your students." "The children are wonderful," Madeline said sincerely. "Eager to learn and refreshingly direct." In Boston, children of society are taught to be seen and not heard from such a young age. "You miss the city?" Owen asked, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. Madeline considered her answer carefully. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the theaters, but not much else." "What brought you all the way out here, if you don't mind my asking?" Most Eastern ladies consider Wyoming barely civilized. It was the question she had been dreading, yet knew was inevitable. She had prepared a vague response about seeking adventure and opportunity, but something about Owen Reed's straightforward manner made her reluctant to offer him anything less than honesty, or as much honesty as she dared. "I needed a fresh start," she said finally. "Boston held painful memories." Owen nodded, seeming to understand there was more to the story but respecting her reluctance to share it. "Well, Promise Creek is certainly different from Boston. Rough around the edges but honest. People here judge you by your actions, not your past." "That's precisely what I needed," Madeline admitted softly. Their conversation was interrupted by the mayor announcing the next dance, and soon they were swept back into the festivities. As the evening progressed, Madeline danced with several other men from the community, but found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Owen as he conversed with friends or partnered other ladies in the dances. When the social finally wound down close to midnight, Owen appeared at her side as she was gathering her shawl. "May I walk you home, Miss Smith? It's dark, and these streets can be uneven." The schoolhouse was barely 300 yards from the church, hardly a journey requiring an escort, but Madeline found herself nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. That would be kind." They walked slowly in the moonlight, the sounds of the social fading behind them. The night was cool but not cold, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in Boston's smoke-filled skies. "I'll come by on Tuesday evening around 6 if that suits you," Owen said as they approached the schoolhouse. "For Miguel's first lesson." "That would be perfect," Madeline replied. "I look forward to meeting him." They reached her door, and Madeline turned to bid him good night. In the silvery moonlight, his features seemed both stronger and gentler, and she found herself momentarily captivated by the way the light caught in his eyes. "I enjoyed your company this evening, Miss Smith," he said, his voice low. "As did I, Mr. Reed." He took her hand and bowed slightly over it, a gesture that reminded her of Eastern courtesy, but somehow felt entirely different when performed by this man whose calloused fingers held hers with such care. "Good night, Madeline," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Good night, Owen," she replied, the informality feeling both daring and right. She watched him walk away before entering her small apartment, her mind and heart fuller than they had been in a very long time. Tuesday evening arrived, and with it came Owen in a wagon driven by a young Hispanic boy with bright, intelligent eyes and a shy smile. "Miss Smith, this is Miguel Sanchez," Owen introduced them. "Miguel, Miss Smith has agreed to teach you reading, writing, and arithmetic." "It is very nice to meet you, Miss Smith," Miguel said carefully, each word precisely pronounced. "I'm pleased to meet you too, Miguel," Madeline replied, charmed by the boy's earnest manner. "Are you ready for your first lesson?" "Yes, Mr. Reed. He tells me I must learn good English to have opportunities." Owen helped Madeline into the wagon, his hand strong and steady as she climbed up. "Miguel came to work for me 2 years ago," he explained as they set off toward his ranch. "Crossed the border with his uncle looking for work. His uncle moved on to California, but Miguel stayed. He's got a natural way with horses that's rare to find." The pride in Owen's voice when he spoke of the boy touched Madeline deeply. It was clear that this was not merely an employer-employee relationship, but something more paternal. The Reed Ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, a sprawling collection of buildings centered around a 2-story house built of sturdy logs and stone. Corrals and barns spread outward from the main house, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush grassland. "Welcome to the Triple R," Owen said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "It's impressive," Madeline replied truthfully. "You've built all this yourself." "Started with 20 acres and 6 cows," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Been adding to it for 12 years now." Inside the main house, Madeline was surprised by the comfortable, if masculine, furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by sturdy sofas and chairs. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested Owen Reed was more well-read than his cowboy appearance might indicate. Miguel's lesson took place at the large dining table, where Madeline assessed his current abilities and began with basic reading and writing exercises. The boy was indeed intelligent and eager to learn, soaking up information like parched earth absorbing rain. Owen moved about the house during the lesson, occasionally pausing to listen or offer Miguel an encouraging word. When the 2-hour session concluded, He insisted on serving coffee and apple pie that his housekeeper had baked that morning. "You're a natural teacher," Owen observed as Miguel excused himself to check on a mare about to foal. "He learned more in 2 hours with you than in months of me trying to help him in the evenings." "He wants to learn," Madeline said. "That makes all the difference. Still, you have a gift." Owen's gaze was warm with admiration. "Promise Creek is fortunate to have found you." The drive back to town was peaceful, the wagon rolling through the darkness beneath a canopy of stars. Owen pointed out constellations, and Madeline was surprised to discover his knowledge of astronomy. "My father taught me the stars," he explained. "Said a man who can read the sky will never truly be lost. Your father sounds wise. He died when I was 16. My mother followed a year later." His voice held old pain, well managed but still present. "That's when I headed west. Nothing left for me in Missouri." "I'm sorry," Madeline said softly. "Losing family is hard." "It is. But it taught me to make my own way, to build something that would last." He glanced at her in the moonlight. "What about your family, Madeline? Do they miss having you so far away?" The question touched on territory she wasn't prepared to navigate. "My parents passed when I was young. I was raised by an aunt who has her own life now." It wasn't entirely untrue. Her parents had indeed died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her father's sister. That aunt had been all too eager to see 18-year-old Madeline married to Marcus Harrington, whose wealth and position had blinded her to his true nature. Owen seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate and changed the subject, telling her about the upcoming cattle drive to Cheyenne and the challenges of ranching in Wyoming's unpredictable climate. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, Madeline felt a comfortable ease with Owen that was both pleasant and unsettling. Pleasant because conversation with him flowed naturally, without the careful calculation required in her previous life. Unsettling because she found herself wanting to tell him the truth about who she was, and why she had come to Promise Creek, a dangerous impulse she couldn't afford to indulge. "Thank you for the lesson," Owen said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Miguel is already looking forward to Thursday." "As am I," Madeline replied truthfully. "He's a delightful student." Owen held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "Good night, Madeline. Good night, Owen." As she watched the wagon disappear down the darkened street, Madeline acknowledged the growing warmth in her heart whenever Owen Reed was near. It was a feeling both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful, because it reminded her she was still capable of such emotions after years of emotional numbness. Terrifying, because attachment of any kind made her vulnerable. And vulnerability was something she could ill afford if she hoped to remain free of Marcus's reach. The next few weeks established a rhythm to Madeline's new life. Days were spent teaching at the schoolhouse, evenings either preparing lessons or traveling to the Triple R to tutor Miguel. The twice-weekly trips to Owen's ranch became the highlight of her week, not only for the satisfaction of seeing Miguel's rapid progress, but also for the increasing comfort she felt in Owen's presence. After Miguel's lessons, they would often share coffee while discussing books, local events, or Owen's plans for his ranch. Sometimes they would sit on the porch if the weather was fair, watching the sunset paint the vast Wyoming sky in spectacular colors. In those quiet moments, Madeline found herself sharing more of her thoughts and feelings than she had with anyone in years. She spoke of her love of teaching, her enjoyment of literature, her observations about Promise Creek and its inhabitants. She carefully avoided any mention of Boston or her marriage, but in all other ways, she was more honest with Owen than she had been with anyone since, before meeting Marcus. For his part, Owen revealed himself to be a man of surprising depth and consideration. Beneath the rugged exterior of a successful rancher was a thoughtful mind that had educated itself through voracious reading and keen observation. He spoke of his dreams for the Triple R, his concern for the people who worked for him, his hopes that the Wyoming Territory would achieve statehood and bring greater stability to the region. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and russets, Owen walked Madeline to his porch after Miguel had gone to check on his favorite mare. "Winter comes early up here," he said, gazing at the distant mountains already capped with snow. "Another month and we could see serious snow in town." "The children have already warned me," Madeline replied with a smile. "Apparently I should expect days when attendance is impossible due to snowdrifts." "They're right. You might want to prepare some lessons they can take home for those days." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. Then Owen turned to her, his expression serious. "Madeline, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened, both in anticipation and alarm. Over these weeks, she had felt their friendship deepening into something more, and while part of her longed to explore those feelings, another part, the part that remembered Marcus's rage and possessiveness, warned of danger. "There's a harvest festival in town next weekend," Owen continued. "I'd be honored if you'd attend with me. As my guest." The formal phrasing couldn't disguise the significance of the invitation. This wasn't merely neighborly, it was a declaration of interest, a public statement that would be recognized as such by everyone in Promise Creek. Madeline looked into his earnest blue eyes and felt a war within herself. The woman who had fled Boston whispered caution, reminded her that attachments were dangerous, that Marcus was still searching for her. That discovery would mean being dragged back to that beautiful prison of a house. But another voice, one that had grown stronger during her months in Promise Creek, argued that not all men were like Marcus, that Owen Reed had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, that perhaps, just perhaps, she deserved a chance at happiness. "I'd like that very much," she heard herself say, the words bringing both terror and joy. Owen's smile was like sunrise. "I'll call for you at 6 on Saturday then." The Harvest Festival transformed Promise Creek's Main Street into a celebration of autumn bounty. Stalls displayed the fruits of summer labor, preserves and pickles, quilts and carved wooden items, all available for sale or trade. Games were organized for the children, while adults participated in contests of skill or strength. As evening approached, tables were set up in the street for a community feast, followed by dancing beneath strings of lanterns. Madeline had spent the week alternating between anticipation and anxiety about attending the festival with Owen. The school year was progressing well, her students thriving under her guidance. Miguel's English had improved dramatically, and he was now reading simple books with growing confidence. Everything in her new life was unfolding beautifully, which only increased her fear that it could all be snatched away. When Owen arrived at her door, he looked more handsome than ever in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best trousers. He had even trimmed his beard, enhancing the strong lines of his jaw. "You look beautiful," he said softly as she opened the door, his admiring gaze taking in her green dress, the nicest she had brought with her from Boston. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm with a slight bow, and as she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, Madeline felt a surge of something that had been absent from her life for so long she almost didn't recognize it. Happiness. The festival was even more enjoyable with Owen as her escort. He seemed to know everyone, introducing her proudly to ranchers and traders from outlying areas who had come to town for the celebration. They sampled foods from every table, applauded the winners of various contests, and laughed together at the antics of children racing with potato sacks over their legs. When the dancing began, Owen led her onto the improvised dance floor without hesitation. Unlike the church social where she had been uncertain of the steps, Madeline now moved with confidence through the lively reels and folk dances she had learned over the past months. During a slower tune, Owen held her closer than strictly necessary, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "You've changed since you arrived in Promise Creek," he observed quietly. "Have I?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You smile more easily now, laugh more freely." His eyes held hers with gentle intensity. "When you first came, there was a wariness about you, like a wild creature ready to bolt at the first sudden movement." Madeline's breath caught. Had she been so transparent? Perhaps I was simply adjusting to a new place. "Perhaps," he agreed, though his tone suggested he suspected there was more to it. "Whatever the reason, it's good to see you blooming here." The word blooming struck her with unexpected force. It had been so long since she had felt alive, let alone flowering into her true self. Marcus had systematically pruned away everything that made her who she was, training her like a bonsai tree into the shape he desired. Here in Promise Creek, under the open sky and Owen's nurturing regard, she was indeed blooming, returning to her natural form. As the evening progressed, Madeline found herself relaxing completely in Owen's company, laughing more freely than she had in years. When he suggested a walk away from the crowds to catch their breath, she agreed without hesitation. They strolled to the edge of town, where the sounds of the festival faded to a pleasant background murmur. The October night was crisp but not cold, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. "I love it here," Madeline said, gazing up at the constellations Owen had taught her to identify. "The sky seems so much bigger than in the east. Less smoke and buildings to block the view," Owen agreed. "First time I saw the Wyoming sky, I knew I'd found home." They stopped by a large cottonwood tree, its leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. Owen turned to face her, his expression serious in the silvery moonlight. "Madeline, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped a beat, both in anticipation and trepidation. "These past months, getting to know you, spending time with you, they've been the best I can remember." His voice was low, sincere. "I find myself thinking about you when you're not there, looking forward to seeing you again." He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I'm not a man who speaks flowery words or makes grand gestures, but I am a man who knows his own mind and heart. And both are telling me that what I feel for you is something rare and precious." Madeline felt tears prick her eyes. His words touched something deep within her, a place she had thought Marcus had destroyed forever: her capacity to feel cherished, to believe in the possibility of love that didn't possess but celebrated. "Owen, she began, but he shook his head slightly. "You don't need to say anything now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I understand there are things in your past you're not ready to share, and I respect that. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here to listen." His understanding nearly undid her. In that moment, Madeline wanted nothing more than to tell him everything about Marcus, about her escape, about her fear of being found. But the risk was too great. If Owen knew she was a runaway wife, legally still bound to another man, would he look at her the same way? Would the town that had accepted her still welcome her if they knew she had lied about her identity? Instead of words, she responded with action, rising on tiptoe to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin. Owen's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. At her nod, he lowered his head and kissed her with such tender reverence that tears spilled from her eyes. It was everything a kiss should be: gentle yet passionate, respectful yet ardent, an invitation rather than a demand. When they parted, Owen brushed away her tears with his thumb. "I didn't mean to make you cry." "Happy tears," she assured him, though they were also tears of fear and regret that this beautiful moment existed in the shadow of her secrets. They returned to the festival hand in hand, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. For the remainder of the evening, Madeline allowed herself to simply be present in the joy of the moment, setting aside her fears for one perfect night. November brought the first heavy snows to Promise Creek, transforming the landscape into a glittering white expanse. The schoolhouse was kept warm by the large stove that Owen had personally ensured was in good repair before winter set in, and attendance remained steady despite the weather. Madeline's relationship with Owen continued to deepen. They saw each other not only during Miguel's lessons, but also for Sunday dinners at his ranch or quiet evenings by the fire in her small apartment above the schoolhouse. They read to each other from favorite books, discussed ideas and dreams, and shared gentle kisses that never demanded more than she was ready to give. In many ways, it was the courtship Madeline had dreamed of as a young girl: respectful, intellectual, built on genuine affection and mutual interests rather than social advantage or physical possession. Yet as Christmas approached, her anxiety grew. 6 months had passed since her escape from Boston, and while she had received no indication that Marcus had tracked her to Wyoming, she knew his pride would not allow him to simply accept her disappearance. He would be searching, using his wealth and connections to trace her movements west. On a snowy evening a week before Christmas, Owen arrived at her door with a small pine tree bundled under his arm and a crate of ornaments. "I thought you might like to decorate for the holiday," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "I remember you mentioning that Christmas was always your favorite time of year." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Madeline helped him set up the tree in the corner of her small sitting room. As they hung delicate glass ornaments and strings of cranberries, Owen told stories of Christmases on his ranch, of the traditions he maintained even when it was just him and his workers. "My mother always said Christmas is meant to be shared," he said, carefully placing a star atop the tree. "No matter how few or many gather around your table, it's the sharing that matters." Madeline thought of the elaborate but cold Christmases of her marriage, the ostentatious decorations, the formal dinners with Marcus's business associates, the expensive but impersonal gifts. Even before her marriage, holidays with her aunt had been more about social obligations than genuine warmth. "This will be my first real Christmas in a very long time," she admitted softly. Owen's expression grew tender. He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Then we'll make it memorable." As he prepared to leave later that evening, Owen hesitated at the door. "Madeline, I'd like you to join me for Christmas at the ranch. Miguel will be there, and my foreman Jack and his wife Emma. Nothing fancy, just good food and good company." The invitation filled her with both longing and apprehension. To spend Christmas with Owen in his home, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for one another, was deeply appealing. Yet it also represented another step toward a future she wasn't certain she could claim. "I'd love to," she said finally, deciding that whatever the future held, she would allow herself this happiness. Owen's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll send the sleigh for you Christmas morning." He kissed her gently before departing into the snowy night, leaving Madeline standing in her doorway watching his tall figure until it disappeared into the swirling white. Christmas at the Triple R was everything Madeline had hoped for and more. The main house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a massive tree dominating the great room. Delicious aromas filled the air as Emma, Jack's wife, directed the preparation of a feast that would feed not only those staying at the main house, but also the ranch hands in the bunkhouse. Miguel presented Madeline with a hand-carved wooden box for her teaching supplies, his pride in his workmanship evident in his shy smile. Jack and Emma welcomed her warmly, treating her not as their employer's guest but as family, and Owen watched her throughout the day with such tenderness in his eyes that Madeline felt simultaneously exalted and terrified. Because she was falling in love with him, had fallen in love with him, and that love made her both stronger and more vulnerable than she had ever been. After dinner, while Jack and Emma cleared away dishes and Miguel entertained them with guitar music he had learned from his uncle, Owen led Madeline to a quiet corner of the room. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Madeline unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. "I noticed you writing lesson plans on scraps of paper," Owen explained. "Thought you might like something more permanent for your thoughts." The gift was perfect, practical yet personal, acknowledging her profession while encouraging her private reflections. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Thank you. Open it," he urged gently. Inside, on the first page, he had written in a strong, clear hand, "To Madeline, whose spirit blooms even in winter, with deepest affection, Owen." Tears pricked her eyes at the inscription. "I'll treasure it always." "I have something else," Owen said, his voice dropping lower. "Not a physical gift." "Oh," she looked up, curious. "An invitation, or perhaps a declaration." He took her hands in his. "Madeline Smith, these past months have shown me what I want for my future, and that future includes you. I'm not rushing you, and I don't expect an immediate answer, but I want you to know that when you're ready, I hope you'll consider becoming my wife." The world seemed to stop around her. In his blue eyes, she saw everything she had ever wanted: love, respect, partnership, a home not made of walls but of shared dreams. And in that same moment, she saw everything she stood to lose when the truth inevitably came to light. "Owen," she began, her voice trembling, "there are things you don't know about me." "I know everything I need to know," he insisted gently. "I know you're kind and intelligent. I know you're brave enough to come alone to a frontier town and make a place for yourself. I know you care deeply about your students, about Miguel, about this community. But whatever happened before you came here, whatever you're running from, yes, I've guessed that much, it doesn't change who you are now, who you've shown yourself to be day after day." His perception stunned her. Had he known all along that she was hiding something? "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share," he continued. "Just know that when you are ready, nothing you could say would change how I feel about you." Oh, but it could, Madeline thought desperately. If he knew she was still legally married to another man, that she had fled without divorce or legal separation, that Marcus could claim her legally if he found her, would Owen still look at her with such tenderness then? "I need time," she whispered. "You have it," he assured her, raising her hands to his lips. "All the time you need." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Joy at Owen's declaration warred with fear of losing everything she had built in Promise Creek. By the time Owen drove her back to town in his sleigh, the stars sparkling above them in the clear winter sky, Madeline had made a decision. She would tell Owen the truth. All of it. If his feelings changed, if he withdrew his proposal, it would break her heart, but better a clean break now than the inevitable shattering that would come if Marcus found her after she had bound Owen's life to hers. "Could we talk tomorrow?" she asked as he walked her to her door. "There are things I need to tell you." Owen's expression was serious but not troubled. "Of course. I'll come by after church." He kissed her goodnight, a kiss full of promise and patience before disappearing into the snowy night. Alone in her small apartment, Madeline sat at her table and opened the journal Owen had given her. Taking up a pen, she began to write, not lesson plans or teaching notes but her story, the truth about Madeline Harrington, formerly of Boston, who had fled an abusive marriage to reinvent herself as Madeline Smith, schoolteacher of Promise Creek. She wrote through the night, filling pages with the painful reality of her past. Writing it down was cathartic, a releasing of poison that had festered too long in secret. By dawn, she had filled nearly a quarter of the journal and felt both exhausted and curiously lightened. After church the next morning, Owen arrived as promised. He took one look at her pale face and red-rimmed eyes, and his expression softened with concern. "You haven't slept," he observed, following her into the small sitting room. "No," she admitted. "I was writing what I need to tell you." She gestured to the journal on the table. Owen glanced at it, then back at her. "Would you prefer I read it, or would you rather tell me yourself?" The fact that he offered her the choice, that even now he prioritized her comfort, nearly undid her. "I think I need to say it aloud," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "But the journal contains everything if you want the details later." Owen settled into the chair across from her, his posture open, his expression attentive but not anxious. He was giving her space, she realized, not crowding her physically or emotionally. Taking a deep breath, Madeline began. "My name isn't Madeline Smith. It's Madeline Harrington. I was married to Marcus Harrington of Boston." She saw the slight widening of Owen's eyes at this revelation but pressed on before courage failed her. "We married when I was 18. He was 30, wealthy, charming, or so I thought. My aunt, who raised me after my parents died, was thrilled with the match. Marcus promised me the world." Her voice grew harder. "What he gave me instead was a beautiful prison. Once the wedding ring was on my finger, everything changed. He controlled where I went, who I saw, what I wore, what I read. At first it was subtle suggestions rather than commands, but over time." She found herself unable to continue for a moment, the memories too raw despite the months and miles between then and now. Owen leaned forward slightly. "Did he hurt you, Madeline?" His voice was quiet but held a dangerous edge. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "At first, it was just words. Criticism, belittling, making me doubt myself. Then came the isolation. I wasn't allowed to maintain friendships, to visit family without him present. And finally, yes, he hurt me. Not often, and always where it wouldn't show. He was careful about his reputation." Owen's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained controlled. "How did you get away?" "I planned for months," Madeline said, finding her voice again. "Saving small amounts of money, gathering information about trains west, creating a new identity. I left while he was at his club one night. Left everything behind except what I could carry in one small bag." She finally looked up, needing to see Owen's reaction. "I'm still legally his wife, Owen. I didn't seek a divorce. I couldn't without revealing my location. And if he finds me, the law is on his side. A husband has the right to compel his wife's return." Owen's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you think he's looking for you?" "I know he is," she replied with certainty. "Not because he loves me. Marcus doesn't know how to love. But because I'm his possession, and he doesn't surrender what belongs to him. His pride wouldn't allow it." "You don't belong to him," Owen said, his voice low and fierce. You don't belong to anyone but yourself." Tears filled her eyes at his words. "The law doesn't see it that way." "The law isn't always right," Owen replied. He stood and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Madeline, thank you for trusting me with the truth. It changes nothing about how I feel about you. If anything, knowing what you've overcome only increases my admiration." Relief washed through her, so intense she felt light-headed. "But Owen, you don't understand. As long as I'm legally married to Marcus, we'll find a way," he said with quiet determination. "Wyoming isn't Boston. The territory has different laws, and they favor women more than those in the East. And I have friends, a lawyer in Cheyenne who might be able to help, a judge in Laramie who owes me a favor." His confidence gave her hope, but she remained cautious. "Even if a territorial divorce were possible, Marcus has resources, connections. If he discovers where I am, then he'll have to go through me to get to you," Owen stated simply. "And I protect what I love, Madeline. Love." He had said it. Not affection, not regard, but love. "You still want me, knowing everything?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I want you more," he replied firmly. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known. To leave everything behind, to start over alone in a place so different from what you knew, that takes extraordinary courage." He raised a hand to cup her cheek. "I said yesterday that I want you in my future, and I meant it. The path might be more complicated than I realized, but the destination hasn't changed." Madeline leaned into his touch, her heart fuller than she had believed possible. "I love you, Owen Reed." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "And I love you, Madeline, whatever name you choose to use." He drew her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his strength. In his embrace, Madeline found something she had thought forever lost to her, a sense of home that had nothing to do with walls or roofs, but everything to do with being truly seen and accepted. The new year of 1876 brought both hope and challenge. After consulting discreetly with his lawyer friend in Cheyenne, Owen returned with mixed news. Wyoming Territory's laws did indeed offer more protection for women than those in the East, including more liberal divorce provisions. However, without proof of Marcus's mistreatment or a formal divorce proceeding that would require notification of her husband, Madeline's situation remained precarious. "Jeffries, my lawyer friend, suggests we gather evidence," Owen explained one evening as they sat by the fire in his study. "Testimonials from doctors who treated your injuries, servants who witnessed his behavior, friends who saw the changes in you." "That would mean contacting people in Boston," Madeline said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Marcus would know immediately." "Not necessarily. Jeffries has connections, private investigators who could be discreet." Madeline considered this. She had left behind a few allies in Boston, her lady's maid Sarah, who had helped her pack her escape bag, Dr. Pearson, who had treated her broken wrist and pretended to believe it was caused by a fall. Even Marcus's own sister Louisa, who had once whispered, "I would run too if I could," after witnessing one of her brother's cold rages. "It might be possible," she conceded. "But it would take time, and there's always risk." "There's also risk in doing nothing," Owen pointed out gently. "Living in fear of discovery isn't really living, Madeline." He was right, she knew. These past months in Promise Creek had shown her what life should be. A life of purpose, connection, and love rather than fear and isolation. But taking active steps to secure her freedom might also accelerate the very discovery she feared. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Owen nodded, respecting her need for time. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." January turned to February, and Madeline continued to weigh her options. Meanwhile, her relationship with Owen deepened, though they were careful to maintain propriety in public. To the townspeople, they were courting a relationship serious enough to prompt speculation about a spring wedding, but not yet officially engaged. Only Mayor Thornton and his wife, as her employers, knew the truth about her situation, Owen having decided they needed to be informed in case Marcus or his agents came looking for her. To Madeline's relief, the Thorntons had been understanding and supportive, promising discretion and protection. "This town takes care of its own," Mayor Thornton had assured her. "And you're one of us now, Miss Smith or Mrs. Harrington, if you prefer, but I suspect you'll be Mrs. Reed before too long, one way or another." February brought heavy snows that isolated Promise Creek for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, Madeline moved temporarily to the Triple R, along with several other townspeople who had been caught at the ranch when the blizzard hit. It was improper by Eastern standards, but frontier necessity trumped social convention, and the presence of Emma and several other women provided adequate chaperonage. Those snowbound days gave Madeline a deeper glimpse into what life as Owen's wife might be like. She watched him manage his ranch with firm but fair leadership, ensuring everyone was fed, warm, and occupied despite the forced confinement. She saw his genuine concern for the welfare of both people and animals under his care. And she witnessed firsthand the respect he commanded not through intimidation but through integrity. It was during this time that Madeline made her decision. When they finally returned to town after the roads were cleared, she asked Owen to send for his lawyer friend. "I want to fight for my freedom," she told him. "Not just run from the past but face it and defeat it." Owen's proud smile was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. Jeffries arrived in early March, a dapper man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put Madeline at ease. He listened carefully to her full story, taking detailed notes and asking precise questions about dates, witnesses, and potential evidence. "It won't be easy," he cautioned when she had finished. "But it's not impossible. Wyoming territory has granted divorces to women in similar situations, especially when abuse can be proven. The challenge will be gathering evidence without alerting your husband. Can it be done?" Owen asked, his hand reassuring on Madeline's shoulder. "I have a colleague in Boston who specializes in discreet inquiries," Jeffries replied. "With your permission, Mrs. Harrington, I'll engage her services. She'll need names of potential witnesses, locations, any details that might help build your case." Madeline provided everything she could remember: names of servants, social acquaintances who might have noticed changes in her behavior, dates of medical treatments. The process was painful, requiring her to revisit memories she had tried to bury, but Owen's steady presence gave her strength. "How long will this take?" she asked when Jeffries had filled several pages with notes. "Gathering evidence, perhaps a month or 2. Filing the petition for divorce once we have sufficient proof, another few weeks. The court proceedings themselves could be quick or prolonged, depending on whether your husband contests it." "He will," Madeline said with certainty. "Marcus never surrenders anything without a fight." Jeffries nodded grimly. "Then we must be prepared for a battle. But it's a battle worth fighting, Mrs. Harrington. Wyoming may be a territory, but our courts recognize a woman's right to safety and self-determination more than many Eastern states do." After Jeffries departed, promising to begin work immediately, Madeline and Owen sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the coming struggle settling around them. "Are you sure about this?" Owen asked finally. "We could find another way." "Leave the territory, go somewhere he'd never look, California perhaps, or even Canada." Madeline shook her head. "No more running. Promise Creek is home now, you're home." She took his hand, drawing strength from his solid warmth. "Besides, I've learned something important since coming here." What's that? That walls don't make a prison unless you believe they do. She smiled up at him. Marcus controlled me because I allowed it, because I was raised to believe that a wife's duty was submission, that my value lay in being what others wanted me to be. I don't believe that anymore. Owen brought her hand to his lips. You've always been stronger than you knew. Not always, she contradicted gently, but I am now. April brought the first signs of spring to Promise Creek crocuses pushing through the melting snow, longer days, the return of birds from their winter migrations. It also brought news from Jeffries. His Boston colleague had located several witnesses willing to provide statements about Marcus's controlling and abusive behavior. Sarah, my lady's maid, has kept a journal, Madeline marveled, reading the letter. She documented the times she helped cover bruises with cosmetics, the days I was indisposed after Marcus's rages. And Dr. Pearson has agreed to provide his medical records showing a pattern of injuries inconsistent with my explanations at the time. This is good, Owen said, his expression brightening. Very good. What about Marcus? Any indication he knows you're being sought? Not yet. Jeffries' colleague is being extremely cautious. Madeline continued reading. She's approaching potential witnesses as part of a general inquiry into women's safety in marriage, not mentioning me specifically until she's sure of their sympathies. The school term was nearing its end, and Madeline threw herself into preparations for the year-end examinations and celebration. Working with her students provided a welcome distraction from the tension of waiting for further news from Jeffries. Miguel, meanwhile, had progressed so rapidly in his studies that Owen suggested he might attend the regular school in the fall rather than continuing with private lessons. He's ready, Owen told Madeline as they walked along Promise Creek one warm evening in late April, and it would be good for him to interact with others his age. I agree, Madeline said, pleased by the boy's development. He has a quick mind and a thirst for knowledge. He could go far with proper education. Owen nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that. The boy deserves a chance at whatever future he wants, ranching, business, even university someday if that's his desire. University? Madeline looked at him in surprise. That would be extraordinary for a boy in his circumstances. Why not? Owen shrugged. I have the means to provide it, and he has the intelligence to succeed. I was thinking, if things work out as we hope, perhaps we could formally adopt him. The casual mention of their future together, of shared parental responsibility for Miguel, made Madeline's heart swell with emotion. You've already thought of us as a family. From almost the first moment I saw you with him, Owen admitted. The way you treated him with respect, saw his potential rather than just his current circumstances. It told me everything I needed to know about the kind of woman you are. Madeline leaned against his shoulder as they walked. I would be proud to help raise Miguel. He's a remarkable young man. They strolled in comfortable silence for a while, the creek bubbling beside them, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. Then Owen stopped, turning to face her. Madeline, I know we agreed to wait until your legal situation is resolved before making formal plans. But I find myself unable to wait any longer to give you this. From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather pouch. Opening it, he spilled its contents into his palm, a gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he explained, his voice husky with emotion. The only thing of value I brought with me when I left Missouri. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it. Madeline's eyes filled with tears as he continued, I'm not asking you to wear it publicly yet, not until you're free to do so, but I want you to have it now as a promise between us. Owen, she whispered, overwhelmed by the gesture. I love you, Madeline. Whatever name you use, Whatever challenges we face, that won't change. Will you accept this ring as a promise of my heart and my future?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. The pearl gleamed softly in the fading light, a symbol not of possession, but of commitment freely given and received. Madeline would wear the ring on a chain beneath her clothing until she could display it openly. But knowing it was there, feeling its weight against her skin, gave her renewed determination to secure her freedom once and for all. May brought a letter from Jeffries that changed everything. His colleague in Boston had not only gathered substantial evidence of Marcus's abuse, but had also uncovered something unexpected. Marcus had been conducting an affair with the widow of one of his business partners for at least 3 years of his marriage to Madeline. "Adultery," Jeffries wrote, "is grounds for divorce in every state and territory. Combined with the evidence of cruelty, it creates an unassailable case. I've filed the petition in the territorial court in Cheyenne. Because of the sensitive nature of the case and the distance involved, the judge has agreed to an unusual arrangement service of papers through publication, rather than direct delivery to Mr. Harrington. This means notices will appear in legal sections of newspapers, fulfilling the legal requirement without immediately alerting him to your whereabouts." "This could work," Owen said when Madeline shared the news. "By the time he realizes what's happening, the divorce could already be granted." Madeline was cautiously optimistic but still afraid. Marcus has lawyers, powerful friends. He could contest it, delay proceedings. "He could," Owen acknowledged. "But according to Jeffries, the evidence is strong, and Marcus has his reputation to consider. A public airing of his behavior, both the abuse and the adultery, would damage his standing in Boston society." The possibility of freedom seemed suddenly more real than ever before. Madeline allowed herself to imagine a future without fear, a future as Owen's wife, helping to raise Miguel, perhaps even having children of their own someday. The school term ended in early June with an exhibition of student work and recitations that drew the entire community. Madeline watched with pride as her pupils demonstrated their progress, from the youngest beginners proudly reading simple sentences to the oldest students presenting complex mathematical solutions, or reciting lengthy passages of literature from memory. Miguel, invited to participate despite not being a regular student, impressed everyone with a bilingual presentation on the history of cattle ranching in the American West. His confidence and articulation drew admiring comments from many community members, and Owen beamed with paternal pride. As the celebration concluded and families began to disperse, Mayor Thornton approached Madeline with a serious expression. "Miss Smith, a word in private, if you please." Something in his tone sent a chill through her. Owen, sensing her sudden tension, moved protectively to her side. "Is something wrong, Thomas?" he asked. The mayor glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "A telegram arrived this morning from Cheyenne. Jeffries sent it. He wanted you to know immediately Marcus Harrington has arrived in Cheyenne." Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. "He knows. He's found me." "Not necessarily," the mayor cautioned. "Jeffries says he's made inquiries about the divorce petition but doesn't appear to know your location yet. However, it's only a matter of time before he discovers you're in Promise Creek." Owen's arm came around Madeline's shoulders, steadying her. "What does Jeffries advise?" "He suggests Miss Smith, Mrs. Harrington, come to Cheyenne immediately. The judge is willing to expedite the hearing given the circumstances, but she needs to be present to testify." "I'll take her," Owen said without hesitation. "We can leave at first light tomorrow." Madeline's mind raced with possibilities. each more terrifying than the last. If Marcus found her before the divorce was granted, he could legally force her to return with him. Even if he couldn't compel her physically, he could make life impossible for her in Promise Creek, could damage her reputation, could harm those she cared about, including Owen. "No," she said suddenly, straightening her spine. "Running to Cheyenne would be exactly what he expects. Marcus knows I'm afraid of him. He's counted on that fear to control me. But I'm not the same woman who fled Boston." Owen studied her face, concern warring with admiration in his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'll face him here, on my own terms, surrounded by people who know and trust me." She turned to Mayor Thornton. "Send a telegram to Jeffries. Tell him I'll testify in Cheyenne after I've confronted Marcus directly. And tell him to inform Marcus that Madeline Smith of Promise Creek is prepared to receive him if he dares to come." The mayor's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, the mouse has become a lion." "Not a mouse," Madeline corrected gently. "Just a woman who finally realized her own strength." Owen pulled her closer. "Are you sure about this? Marcus is dangerous." "So is a cornered animal," she replied. "But I'm no longer trapped in his cage. This is my home, these are my people, and you are my future. It's time Marcus understood that." Mayor Thornton excused himself to send the telegram, leaving Owen and Madeline alone in the schoolhouse. "You're the bravest person I know," Owen said softly, taking both her hands in his. "But you don't have to face him alone. I'll be with you. All of Promise Creek will." Madeline raised her face to his, love and determination shining in her eyes. "I know. That's why I'm no longer afraid." Marcus Harrington arrived in Promise Creek 3 days later, stepping down from the stagecoach with the arrogant confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. He was still handsome in a cold, polished manner, tall and impeccably dressed, his dark hair and beard meticulously groomed, his bearing imperious. Madeline watched his arrival from the window of the mayor's office, where she had gathered with Owen, the Thorntons, Sheriff Davis, and Jeffries, who had ridden in from Cheyenne the previous day. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her hands were steady. "He looks exactly as I imagined," Jeffries murmured. "Every inch the Boston aristocrat." "Don't be fooled by the polished exterior," Madeline warned. "There's nothing civilized about Marcus when he's crossed." Owen's hand tightened around hers. "He can't hurt you here." They watched as Marcus glanced around the dusty Main Street with obvious disdain before entering the small hotel across from the mayor's office. He would undoubtedly refresh himself after the journey before seeking her out. Marcus was fastidious about his appearance, especially when preparing for a confrontation. "How do you want to proceed?" Sheriff Davis asked. "I can accompany you when you meet him. Make it clear that no funny business will be tolerated in my town." Madeline considered this. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I think it's better if I see him alone initially." "Absolutely not," Owen objected. "He's dangerous, Madeline." "Not in public, not in a place like this," she assured him. "Marcus is too concerned with appearances to make a scene where others might witness it. I suggest we meet in the hotel dining room, neutral territory, but public enough that he'll be on his best behavior." Jeffries nodded approvingly. "A wise approach, and the rest of us can be nearby, within earshot, but not hovering." They agreed on a plan. Madeline would send a note to Marcus at the hotel, inviting him to meet her in the dining room at 2 o'clock. Owen, Jeffries, and Sheriff Davis would position themselves at various tables around the room, close enough to intervene if necessary, but not obviously together. When the appointed time arrived, Madeline entered the hotel dining room with her head high and her back straight. She had chosen her clothing carefully, a simple but elegant blue dress that represented her new life, rather than the elaborate fashions Marcus had always insisted upon. Around her neck, visible for the first time, hung the chain bearing Owen's ring. Marcus was already seated at a corner table, a glass of whiskey before him. His eyes narrowed as she approached, taking in her appearance with a calculating gaze that once would have made her shrink into herself. Now, she met it steadily. "Madeline," he said, not rising as propriety dictated he should. "You look different." "I am different," she replied, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Wyoming agrees with me." His mouth tightened at her directness. "This childish game has gone on long enough. I've come to take you home." Boston was never home, Marcus, merely an address. Anger flashed in his eyes, quickly controlled. "You're my wife, your place is with me." "Not for much longer," Madeline said calmly. "The divorce petition has been filed. The hearing is scheduled for next week in Cheyenne." Marcus laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Divorce? On what grounds?" "You abandoned our marriage, Madeline. If anyone has grounds for complaint, it's me." "The courts will decide based on evidence," she replied. "Evidence of your cruelty and your adultery." The color drained from his face at the last word, confirming what Jeffries's investigator had discovered. "You can't prove anything. We have witness statements from Dr. Pearson, from Sarah, from your own sister Louisa. And as for the adultery, Mrs. Eleanor Westfield has been quite indiscreet in certain circles about her special friendship with you." For a moment, naked rage transformed Marcus's handsome features into something ugly and frightening, the true face that had been hidden behind the charming mask during their courtship. Madeline felt a familiar twist of fear in her stomach but forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "You've been busy," he said finally, his voice dangerously soft. "But you forget, my dear, that I have resources you can't imagine. One word from me, and this pathetic little town would discover exactly who their schoolteacher really is, a mentally unstable woman who abandoned her marital duties on a whim. Everyone here already knows the truth, Marcus." Madeline leaned forward slightly. "I've hidden nothing from them, not my real name, not our marriage, not the reasons I fled. And they've stood by me regardless." This clearly wasn't the response he had expected. Marcus glanced around the dining room, his gaze pausing briefly on Owen, who was pretending to read a newspaper at a nearby table. "That's him, isn't it? The rancher you've taken up with." Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "How quaint, Madeline, trading Boston society for a dirty cowboy." "That dirty cowboy owns more land than you ever will," Madeline retorted, a rare flash of anger breaking through her calm facade. "And unlike you, he understands that love isn't about possession or control." Marcus's hand shot across the table to grip her wrist painfully. "You belong to me," he hissed, "and I'll see you both ruined before I let you go." Before Madeline could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Owen stood there, his expression deceptively mild but his eyes hard as flint. "I believe the lady would like her hand back," he said quietly. Marcus didn't release her. "This is a private conversation between husband and wife." "Not anymore," came another voice as Sheriff Davis approached, his badge gleaming on his chest. "Mr. Harrington, I'm going to have to ask you to unhand Miss Smith." The use of her chosen name rather than her married one was deliberate. Madeline knew a public statement about where Promise Creek's loyalties lay. Marcus glared at the sheriff, then at Owen, before finally releasing Madeline's wrist. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low with fury. "I'll see you in court." "Yes, you will," Jeffries interjected, joining them with several papers in hand. "And while we're all here, I might as well serve you formally with these documents. The divorce hearing is scheduled for next Thursday in Cheyenne. Your presence is requested but not required." Marcus snatched the papers, his face livid. "You'll regret this, Madeline. All of you will." He stormed from the dining room, nearly colliding with Mayor Thornton in the doorway. The entire room had gone silent, every eye on the unfolding drama. Owen immediately moved to Madeline's side, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her wrist ached where Marcus had gripped it. "Better than fine, actually." For the first time since I met him, I looked at Marcus and felt nothing, no fear, no anger, not even pity, just nothing. Owen's smile was like sunrise. "That's called freedom, Madeline." The Cheyenne courtroom was imposing, with its high ceilings and polished wooden furnishings, but Madeline faced it with the same composure she had shown during her confrontation with Marcus. She sat beside Jeffries at one table, while Marcus and his hastily engaged Wyoming lawyer occupied another. The proceedings were mercifully brief. Jeffries presented the evidence of cruelty and adultery, calling witnesses who had provided sworn statements. Marcus's lawyer attempted to paint Madeline as emotionally unstable and manipulative, but the testimony of Dr. Pearson, who had traveled from Boston at Jeffries's request, carried particular weight with the judge. When it was Madeline's turn to speak, she told her story simply and directly, without embellishment or dramatics. She described the gradual transformation of her marriage from promising to oppressive, the isolation and control that had become her daily reality, and finally, the physical abuse that had driven her to flee. Marcus glared at her throughout her testimony, his handsome face set in lines of cold fury. When given the opportunity to respond, he denied everything, claiming Madeline had always been high-strung and prone to exaggeration. "My wife needs proper care and supervision, Your Honor," he concluded smoothly. "Not divorce, but a return to her rightful place in our home, where I can ensure she receives appropriate medical attention." The judge, a weathered man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness, listened to both sides without betraying his thoughts. When all testimony had been presented, he called a brief recess to consider his ruling. Owen, who had been sitting silently in the gallery throughout the proceedings, joined Madeline and Jeffries in a small anteroom during the recess. "You were magnificent," he told her, taking her hands in his. "Clear, composed, dignified." "I just told the truth," Madeline replied. "For the first time in years I could speak without fear of consequences." "The judge seemed receptive," Jeffries added cautiously, "but we shouldn't count our victory before it's granted." Judge Peterson is known for his thoroughness, not his predictability. When court reconvened an hour later, the judge's expression remained inscrutable as he took his seat. The courtroom fell silent, tension palpable in the air. "Having considered the evidence and testimony presented," Judge Peterson began, his voice resonant in the hushed room, "I find the petitioner's claims of cruelty and adultery to be substantiated by credible witnesses and documentation. The respondent's denials, while forcefully presented, are contradicted by physical evidence and the consistent accounts of multiple observers." Madeline felt her breath catch. Beside her, Jeffries sat straighter, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I find the respondent's suggestion that the petitioner requires medical attention for supposed mental instability to be not only unsupported by evidence but deeply troubling in its implications." He fixed Marcus with a stern gaze. "Mr. Harrington, this court is not blind to the tactics often employed by husbands to maintain control over wives who seek independence. Your own testimony reveals a concerning attitude toward marital relations, one that views a wife as property rather than partner." Marcus's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent under the judge's scrutiny. "Therefore," Judge Peterson declared, It is the ruling of this court that the petition for divorce is granted on grounds of cruelty and adultery. Mrs. Harrington is hereby released from all marital obligations and restored to her former legal status, with the right to resume her maiden name or adopt another of her choosing. Madeline closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the finality of the words. Free. Legally. Irrevocably free. Additionally, the judge added, surprising everyone, the court awards Mrs. Harrington a settlement equal to 1/3 of the marital assets, to be assessed and distributed under the supervision of the court. Marcus surged to his feet. This is outrageous. She abandoned our marriage, fled with items of value. Mr. Harrington, the judge interrupted sharply, you would do well to accept this ruling gracefully. Wyoming territory takes a progressive view of women's rights, including their right to fair treatment in marriage and divorce. Your position in Boston society holds no sway here. With a final bang of his gavel, Judge Peterson closed the case. Court is adjourned. The journey back to Promise Creek was quiet, Madeline lost in thought as she processed the reality of her newfound freedom. Owen respected her contemplative mood, driving the wagon in companionable silence, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand reassuringly as they crested the final hill overlooking the town. Golden in the late afternoon sunlight, Madeline finally broke the silence. I keep expecting to feel triumphant, she admitted, but mostly I feel peaceful, as if something tight around my heart has finally loosened. Owen nodded in understanding. Freedom isn't always about fireworks. Sometimes it's just the quiet realization that you can breathe deeply again. She smiled at him, marveling at how perfectly he understood. What happens now? Whatever you want, he replied simply. That's what freedom means, Madeline. The choice is yours. They pulled up in front of the schoolhouse, but before Madeline could descend from the wagon, Owen stayed her with a gentle hand. I meant what I said, the choice is yours, but if you're asking for my preference. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the pearl ring that had been hidden on its chain for months. I'd choose a life with you, as my wife, raising Miguel together and perhaps other children in time, building something meaningful that will outlast us both. He held out the ring. Madeline Smith, or whatever name you choose to use now that you're free, will you marry me? The answer required no thought, no weighing of options. It flowed from her heart with the certainty of water finding its path to the sea. Yes, Owen Reed, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it would remain in full view of the world, a symbol not of possession but of partnership freely chosen. 2 months later, on a perfect August day with the Wyoming sky stretched endless and blue above them, Madeline and Owen were married in the Promise Creek Church. Miguel stood proudly as Owen's best man, while Sarah Wilson served as Madeline's matron of honor. Madeline wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with her grandmother's lace veil and a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the prairie that morning. Owen cut a handsome figure in a new suit, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire, a discomfort that disappeared the moment Madeline appeared at the church door. The whole town turned out for the celebration, which continued long into the evening with dancing, feasting, and heartfelt toasts to the couple's happiness. As the sun began to set, casting the world in gold and amber, Owen led Madeline away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath the cottonwood tree where he had first declared his feelings. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "You gave me something I thought was lost forever, Owen." "What's that?" "Hope. The belief that I deserved more than survival, that I deserved joy." He kissed her gently. You deserved it all along. I just had the good fortune to be the man who got to show you." As they returned to their celebration hand in hand, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had escaped a house that felt like a prison, fleeing across a continent in search of safety. But what she had found in Promise Creek was far more than sanctuary. It was a place where she could grow into her true self, where her mind and heart were valued, where love meant freedom rather than captivity. And in Owen Reed, she had found not a jailer but a partner who delighted in her strength, who encouraged her independence even as he offered his unwavering support. He had given her the kind of love that frees a love built on respect, trust, and genuine admiration. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Madeline knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, not because anyone had placed her there, or because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen this life, this community, this man. And in that choice lay the truest freedom of all. 5 years later, Madeline sat on the porch of the Triple Artiques main house, watching as Owen taught their 3-year-old daughter Rose to ride her first pony. Miguel, now 20 and home from his first year at university in Denver, stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. The ranch had prospered under Owen's management, expanding to include new pastures and breeding stock. Madeline continued to teach at the Promise Creek School, having refused to give up the profession she loved even after marriage. The school had grown along with the town, now requiring 2 teachers, Madeline for the older students and a young woman from Pennsylvania for the younger ones. The settlement from her divorce had been substantial, allowing Madeline and Owen to establish a scholarship fund for promising students like Miguel, who wished to continue their education beyond what Promise Creek could offer. 3 local young people had already benefited from the fund, and Madeline took particular pride in the fact that 2 of them were girls who might otherwise never have had such opportunities. Rose's delighted squeal drew Madeline's attention back to the riding lesson. The little girl sat straight and proud on her pony, her blonde curls so like Owen's in color bouncing with each step of the gentle animal. "Look, Mama, I'm riding," she called. "I see you, darling. You're doing beautifully." Madeline called back, her heart full of love for this fearless child who had been born into a world of possibilities rather than limitations. Beside her on the porch swing, their 1-year-old son James slept peacefully, his tiny hand curled around her finger. He had Madeline's chestnut hair and thoughtful expression, but Owen's blue eyes and steady temperament. As she watched her family, Owen and Miguel encouraging Rose, James slumbering beside her, the dogs lounging in the yard, the cattle grazing on distant hills, Madeline felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This life, with its joys and challenges, its wide open spaces and endless sky, was everything she had never dared to dream might be possible. The journey from Boston to Promise Creek had been more than a physical passage across a continent. It had been a journey from darkness to light, from captivity to freedom, from mere existence to truly living. And though the path had been neither straight nor easy, Madeline wouldn't change a single step that had led her to this place, this moment. This family who loved her not for what she represented or what she could provide, but simply for who she was. As the Wyoming sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and purple, Owen looked up from Rose's lesson and caught Madeline's eye. The love that passed between them in that silent exchange contained all the words they'd ever spoken to each other, and all they had yet to say, a love built on choice rather than obligation, on freedom rather than possession, on partnership rather than ownership. A love that had given Madeline back her voice, her strength, herself, a love that had set her free.